over to the Treasurer to make some comments on the measures put in place by the banks, and then Brendan, Dr Murphy, will speak on the matters I've raised, and then happy to take questions, and I'll get round everybody as best as possible.
Well, thank you, Prime Minister. Yesterday, the Reserve Bank and the Australian Government injected $105 billion of new funding into our financial system in a move that Standard & Poor's described as decisive and coordinated action. The Australian people can be reassured that our financial system remains strong, and our actions have made the system even stronger. Today, the Australian banks have stepped up to the plate and are playing their part in Team Australia. Their decision to defer payments by small businesses for 6 months will be a substantial boost to confidence and the spirit of millions of Australian small businesses. It's a game changer, and it's part of our efforts with industry, with the states, to build a bridge to the recovery, to the time after the global pandemic, the coronavirus, has hit. We have also seen a need to make some changes around regulation of lending to business, and we'll be cutting some red tape, because it's critical that businesses not just have access to capital, but the speed at which that capital is delivered by the banks is as fast as possible. Finally, the Prime Minister referred to a new date for the budget. Forecasting for budgets is difficult at the best of times, let alone when we're in the midst of a global pandemic. And I understand the states are making similar arrangements, and it's important that we are able to deliver a budget at a time where there is more certainty about the economic environment, and that is planned for the first Tuesday in October. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. Congratulations on the work you've done with the banks. They've worked closely with you, and I appreciate your rather determined approach to ensure the outcome, and I thank the banks also for stepping up. Brendan.
Thanks very much, Prime Minister. So, as the Prime Minister said, we've seen significant further growth in cases of coronavirus in Australia. We expected to see that. That's why we've been taking and announcing measures over the last week and before that. It's important to note that we are still seeing a large number of imported cases from other countries. We've now stopped foreign nationals coming into the country, but there are still a lot of Australians coming home, some of them coming from countries with a high risk and outbreaks that we think are probably higher than reported, and a high risk of importing the virus into the country, as we have seen in the last few days in every state pretty much in this country. So this issue of quarantining when you come home is serious. This is not an advisory. This is your civic duty to your fellow Australians to stay home for that entire 14 days if you've come back to Australia. No exceptions. And if you see anyone who is not abiding by that, a recent traveller, make sure they do, because we are really serious about that. It is such a big impact on our outbreaks in the last few days. But we have also seen community outbreaks in a number of states. Again, we expected them. That's why we put in the social distancing measures first announced late last week and progressively further announced this week. They're expected to start hitting in about a week after they were first announced. We always expected a bit of a delay, but as the Prime Minister has announced, we have to make sure that people are very clear about what they mean. What we mean is that you should be distancing yourself from every fellow Australian where possible. That's why we have guidelines for people in gatherings of less than 100. It's no point having a gathering of 20 people if it's in a tiny room and you're all together. You've got to practice social distancing. Keep that 1.5 metres away from each other. Practice good hand hygiene all the time. And stay away from work or the community if you're unwell. This is also incredibly important. Whilst people who are high risks of contacts and return travellers, if they get symptoms, must be tested, there will be cases of community contact where it's not suspected and they might just get a sniffle or a cold, the sort of thing that many of us have soldiered through and gone to work in recent years. We can't do that anymore. Nobody should be going to work or mixing with society or friends or going out if they're unwell at all. Stay at home if you're unwell. Only go out when you're feeling well, go to work when you're feeling well, practice good hand hygiene and practice that social distancing at all times. This is critical now. We have to slow the curve, as the Prime Minister said. We are well prepared. We've had very few deaths so far. They're tragic, and we've had very few people in intensive care. But there is a risk that if we don't do what every one of us has to do as our civic duty to control this spread, it will grow significantly greater.